Welcome to Techiecast Jacks, where the top technology and business experts around discuss the latest trends in high tech. This podcast is hosted by Joe Holbrook, who's an experienced technologist pundit in Jacksonville, Florida.
Welcome back, everyone. Joe Holbrook here, Techiecast Jacks. Let's go ahead and talk about a subject that I think is near and dear to my heart, and that is Google Cloud Platform. Now, I've been involved with Google Cloud since the late 2000s, so about 2009 perhaps. When it comes to Google Cloud services, a lot of folks may not be aware that App Engine was actually on the market just about the same time that AWS came out. And a lot of people do believe, for example, that AWS, has been in the cloud business longer than Google Cloud. And that is true from what I would call a nomenclature perspective. But Google has had, for example, a platform as a service called App Engine out there just as long. It's just that Google didn't make a business model out of cloud services. They've been really focused on development. However, approximately 4 years ago is when we started seeing more demand around Google Cloud, especially when they came out with their Google Cloud Architect certification. That was about 3.5 years ago, I believe, on the top of my head. And I had taken actually the Google Cloud Architect certification when it first came out, the beta exam. And one thing that I was able to get ahead of the curve of, I guess is the way to look at it, was focused mainly on how to understand what the test is going to test you on and how to prepare for the exam. And that's where I started into that area because I found it interesting because I did want an alternative to AWS because it just seemed like everybody and their brother-in-law had an AWS certification, and it really wasn't a differentiator. So I thought, Google Cloud would be a real differentiator out in the market between, AWS and Azure. Now, there were other, of course, cloud services out there like IBM Cloud. It's just that IBM Cloud is such a niche, and in reality, they don't really make their cloud user-friendly, at least at the time, so I didn't really find them a valid option. Also, I had noticed that the customer base was more legacy-based than anything. They would only use IBM Cloud if, for example, they had a VAX sitting there or some kind of mainframe. And that was not actually sort of exaggerated, to be honest. That's what I typically found because they knew IBM. You can't go wrong choosing IBM. The management chose IBM Cloud. It wasn't really a competitive choice from what I had seen. Again, that's just my experience. It's not a fact. Now, when it comes to cloud computing right now, Google Cloud, I think, is really picking up on the market. One of the things that I have run into teaching Google Cloud and working with customers as well is they're really coming out with a boatload of certifications. They're really on par now with AWS, and that's all within 3.5 years or so. So when it comes to understanding Google Cloud certifications and trying to figure out, is there demand for these certifications? I think that's a really valid choice. When you go to Google Trends, you'll see that the trend is still, as of today, which is March 17th, is picking up slightly. However, it's not a trend that I would say, you'd want to bet the house on or anything. It's a trend that is picking up. It is, gradually, getting more demand. I think there's more demand to get certified than actual requirements for folks to work in Google Cloud environments. But that's just what I am seeing. I do know that when I teach on platforms, Google Cloud, that it is picking up and that there's a lot of interest in their certifications. And that's not just the architect or the engineer certification. It's really other certifications such as the DevOps, which I have found to be really huge interest. I know when I had posted a blog post on the beta exam, that actually was one of my top performing blog posts of the last few years. So I think that is really interesting from an interest perspective. And when I teach, for example, on O'Reilly, I always take a survey of what certifications are of interest to the students. And for those folks not familiar with O'Reilly, that platform typically will have up to anywhere from 300 to 500 participants on a course, and this is a live course. This is actually interesting because a survey can really give you great insight. So, and if you've taken any of my courses that are live, you'll know that I usually have 4 or 5 questions that I typically like to get an idea of what people are doing, where they want to go, and again, how can we help them as well. One of the questions I always ask is, what certifications are of interest to you? And it's definitely showing that the Google Cloud certifications like DevOps and Data Engineer are really picking up interest. And then another area that I found interesting is when I asked, for example, what is the vertical that you work in? And when I say vertical, what is the industry sector, for example? Is it medical? Is it education? Is it retail? Is it manufacturing? Is it technology? Whatever that is it a VAR vendor? And I have noticed that at first it was all VARs and vendors taking the courses pretty much. And now I'm starting to get a large interest from areas such as retail, such as manufacturing, and also education. And I think that's of interest to talk about as well. Now, let's talk about demand. One of the things that I did want to point out is if you do want to go spend a few $100s on a certification, you absolutely probably want to realize the amount of time that you need to prepare for that certification. And is it going to be worth you spending $200 or $300 on a first certification? But also, what about the training, and what about the time that you have to invest to be able to exam? That, again, is the million-dollar question, because in reality, I'm not really a big fan of folks getting 10 certifications or 20 certifications with one vendor, or 5 for that matter. Because in reality, if you have proven that you can pass the architect or the developer exam, for example, you're more than competent to work on Google Cloud. And getting the security certification and the network certification is just, not going to add any value, at least from what I see. I'm not saying you shouldn't get it. If you just want to pass it for the fun of it, sure, go for it, have fun. But don't expect that to open any doors for you, because in reality, the demand is really not meeting the number of folks that are getting certified. At least that is what I'm told, and also what I see. I do see a lot of job requirements. I have, of course, some recruiters that keep on contacting me, asking if I know anyone, that wants to move to Nashville, Tennessee, or wants to move to Baton Rouge, Louisiana, or all these odd places. A lot of the opportunities are not going to be where you want to go. And I'm not saying they're bad cities. They're just, smaller cities. And then, of course, the salary will, of course, be small as well. And again, that's okay if that's what you want to look for. And it's all about understanding what the job market has. Excuse me. Now, when it comes to demand in larger cities, I do see, interesting enough, quite a bit of demand in the Chicago area. And I see quite a bit of demand as well, oddly enough, in New York City. And that's really the main areas that I see. Now, I live in Jacksonville, Florida, and Google Cloud has almost no footprint here. All my customers, of course, are going to be outside of Florida. Now, there is some interest in Google Cloud as well in Atlanta, if that's of interest to folks. Now, when it comes to the foreseeable demand, I do see the trends, though, actually looking up. And I think, again, you can actually, do fairly well if you're newer to the cloud. Again, if you're experienced in the cloud and you've been working with AWS for 5 years or more, the salaries are not going to be probably worth your time unless if you can't find another AWS job. That's just my thought. Now, there was a survey that came out from Global Knowledge this year, and if you're familiar with Global Knowledge, they're one of the largest, if not the largest, training companies out there. And I actually did work for them for a while as well, so I'm very familiar with them. And one of the things that they put out every year is a salary survey. What they do is they sample their customer base, and they ask their customers, what are you looking for in training the next year? What are you doing now, and what do you think you'll be doing now in a week or a year, whatever they change the survey question to. But generally, it's forward-looking is what they look for. But they also ask them about what is the salary that they are making. And it turned out that Google Cloud Architect, that certification was the highest paid certification out on the marketplace this year. And that was released, I believe, in February 2020. And the link for that, if you're on YouTube or the podcast links, there should be a link to the survey as well. So please do look at the details and look at the link. Now, I did want to point out another thing as well, is I had noticed as well last year when I search, for example, AWS and GCP, and I compare the demand for AWS and GCP, there's no question AWS is 10 times the demand as far as what people are searching for. And that is still true today. And I also have a link to an article that I wrote actually last year on Medium. Feel free to take a look at it. And it's dated March 27th, 2019. So that's exactly a year ago. And it's pretty much lining up to about what I'm seeing this year. It's just that I think the demand is, up probably 5% over last year. And also, too, Google does have quite a bit more certifications. And you'll see in the trend reports that I took snapshots of, you will see the comparison between Azure, Google Cloud, and AWS. Now, when it comes to demand for certifications and what I see in the next few months or next year, I do see Google Cloud being in higher demand in certain locations in the U.S. and also overseas. I think Google is really starting to master, for example, the sales process and actually being able to what I would call. Now, one thing I did want to point out is I worked in pre-sales around data storage for 5, 6, 7 years, quite a while actually in the DC area. And I sold hundreds of millions of dollars worth of data storage services and networking services. But what I want to clarify is I do see the demand coming up, and I do see Google Cloud getting better in their sales cycle. And this has been confirmed as well by a few folks at Google Cloud as well. So I think, I think the demand will go up. Now, let's go ahead and wrap this up and talk about a few things that you could do to help prepare yourself for demand. One of the things that I think first that we can do is go out and get the Cloud Architect certification. That is really the default Google Cloud certification. Now, there is the Google Cloud Engineer certification, and let me distinguish the difference between the two. The Google Cloud Engineer certification is really more of an entry-level, what I would call hands-on certifications, very comparable to the AWS SysOps certification, the associate. The Cloud Architect is really more focused on designing the cloud, bringing the cloud to life from a design perspective. It's more a sales-driven, basically pre-sale certification. Now, just because I say pre-sales doesn't mean it's not super technical. What I mean is this. For example, the certification will test you on a few command lines. They will test you on development. The thing about the Google Cloud Architect certification is the term architect is sort of deceiving to folks. If you take an AWS architect certification, it's an architect certification. If you take Google Cloud certifications, Google is a development-focused organization. They love developers. They know how to talk to developers. They know how to serve developers. They're all about developing software, and that is their sort of drive in life still. And what I mean by this is, if you are not going into the exam thinking about GKE and container services, then you may run into some challenges on the exam. You need to know what the services do and how they perform these actions in Google Cloud. So how does the workflow go? For example, how does container registry work? Why do you want to use container registry? Why would you want to use Google Cloud Build? Why do you want to go out and deploy on GKE versus App Engine? These are some of the areas that you need to know. And again, there's some minor syntaxes to know. There's also some development to know as far as some of the technical areas. But it really is more focused around case studies and being able to understand customer requirements and translate those requirements into a Google Cloud solution. And with that said, I'd like to go ahead and close it out. The link for this article is, of course, in the description. I go through how the cloud certs compare to other cloud certs, such as AWS. I also, of course, show you the demand, and I also give you some final thoughts. So the link is in the description, and I do wish everyone the best of luck in your careers. And with that said, I'm going to go ahead and